If you want a refreshing perspective from a Gen Z leader who is leading teams of over 100 individuals across 25 plus countries and has had to navigate challenges of a bro culture in Silicon Valley, then you'll want to tune into this episode. Welcome back to another episode of The Leader Within. Today, I'm excited to introduce Isvari Maranwe, the CEO of YuVoice, which is launching the world's largest pro-democracy community engagement platform and gamifies doing good. Isvari has a background as an award-winning cybersecurity and national security attorney, a top columnist, particle physics, and is a published author. Given her dynamic background, I'm excited to have her share her experiences with you. Well, welcome, Isvari. I'm excited to have you share a little bit about your learning lessons from your career, because you've went from an award-winning attorney to now starting multiple companies. So what has been your biggest learning lesson to date in your career?
Yeah, I actually think transitioning careers is where I've learned the most. And I love that you brought that up. I think life, especially modern life for a lot of millennials and Gen Z, is about switching and reinventing yourself every so often. And for me, what's been very important is having a through line of purpose. Why am I doing what I'm doing? And the narrative throughout my entire life, from when I was very young to now, has been me trying to figure out the ways in which I can make the most impact in the world. I've always felt like I'm very responsible for everyone in the world and everyone's happiness, which has a lot of upsides and downsides to it, but that's definitely been my through line. And so when I was an attorney through now, starting nonprofits, and even before, I just felt that is what I'm doing right now the most that I can do to help make the world a better place? And does it align with my talents and skill sets so that I'm able to actually change things? And I think one of the biggest lessons I've learned is having a strong purpose allows you to make those career pivots and reinvent yourself. So it keeps your own life exciting. It keeps your mental health stronger, helps you learn more. It's good for you, but obviously it's also really good for the world or the planet or whatever it is that you care about.
I appreciate the way that you called out the through line piece and just really assessing your purpose, because it shows the intentionality behind the career moves that you make. So then whenever you do go engage a client, an investor, or even an employer, you have a very compelling story to be like, hey, like this is what I bring to the table because of X, Y, and Z. And I know growing up as a child of an immigrant, one of the most difficult things that I had to kind of come to grasp is there's the impact piece, but then there's the piece where it's like, I have to make money so I can pay for my bills and take care of my family kind of feel, right? So how did you kind of navigate that internal monologue as you made each career pivot?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And so I really want to go back to my childhood, because I think one of the things that my immigrant parents did, and I think it resulted in consequences they may not have realized, is they took us to travel to a lot of the world very, very young, from a young age. And it was because they wanted us to be aware of the privileges that we had in the United States. Spent a lot of my childhood summers in India, witnessing abject poverty and living in conditions as well that I wouldn't have lived in the States, but I thought it was normal growing up. Kids get used to what you grow up with. And I will never not feel privileged. So part of the reason why I am less money driven than other people my age is because of my immigrant family. It's simply that I have food in the fridge. I have a smartphone. I will never stop being blown away by the fact that I have a smartphone, right? I can listen to whatever music I want whenever I want. I can access the internet. I can, travel the world. The privileges that I have are insane. So even though I may not be as money driven or entrepreneurial in that sense as a lot of people, I still have so much money as far as I'm concerned, as far as anyone should be concerned. I have so much money, right? So I don't need to have the latest. I don't do the keeping up with the Joneses thing, and I don't feel like I need to have the latest bags, purses, makeup, whatever, because if I have enough, I am genuinely so happy and privileged. And I think it's actually a privilege to recognize that privilege, because we live in a society which rewards eternal ambition. And so it can be hard to have your mental health in a space where you feel privileged just because you have privilege. So that's half of the answer. Is I think is for me, my balance has always come from making sure I have enough. But I have been very good at not chasing more, simply because of that sort of sense of security that I was very thankfully gifted from the situation I grew up in. The second thing for me, that's the balance between, I guess, purpose and having enough, is I genuinely think the college degree that you choose, and I know this is so unpopular, but I genuinely think the college degree that you choose is so important. Like, listen to immigrant parents. I know it's controversial, but there's a reason they want you to go into math or science or engineering or become an attorney. My parents really wanted me to become an attorney, and I think it was the best decision that they ever made helping me get there because like they knew my interest was to do good in the world. And my dad always said, if that's what you want to do, become an attorney, right? Don't just get a poli-sci degree. Don't just like become an attorney. And I think that's so valuable because you have to have something to fall back on, you know, to pay your bills, to be able to do something. And one of the advice that I give a lot of kids these days who are looking to become a wonderful like singer or artist or entrepreneurs, I always tell them, you want a degree where you can do as little work as possible at your day job and make as most money as you can so that you have that free time to pursue your passion. And so if you want to be in music or dance, my recommendation is always get a degree in computer science, you know, walk away. And I think this is less true now with AI and there's all sorts of caveats, but whatever it is that is a good degree to get right now, it's worth getting it because then you have all that free time as an adult to explore what you want to do. And so while I did not have much fun or friendship in my young teens to 20s, that bought me the freedom that I have today.
I really appreciate that outlook because I think that whole concept of having enough ties back into the whole psychology, like Maslow's like hierarchy of needs and stuff like that. But also on the flip end of it is just you're not chasing what happiness should technically feel like. And I use all that with air quotations, and I say all that, sorry, with air quotations, because we are ingrained in a hustle culture, right? And that can be very, very unhealthy, especially when you're like, hey, like I want to do this, but then society dictates otherwise. Speaking of some of the challenges, you are a woman in tech in the Silicon Valley, right? I would love to hear like what has been one of your biggest challenges that you've had to kind of overcome as you navigated that landscape.
Yeah, no, it's awful. It's horrible. Like I don't even have anything else to say. It's bad. It's and you would think it would be better because there are so many Indians in tech in the Valley, and I think there is so much anti-Black colorism that I luckily have not faced because I will say that like Indians and Asians in the Valley have privilege, but the women do not. And I don't know. It's one of the most sexist places I think in my experience traveling and living around the world because there is so much of that ingrained sexism from the home country, and I'm very blunt because of my background, so I can speak to it, that is perpetuated in the Silicon Valley. And there's this line that some comedian said, and I can't remember his name, but he basically said that if you want to raise a conservative Indian son, you don't raise them in India, you raise them in California, because that's genuinely been my experience, because as India has become a more progressive country, and I think this is true for other immigrant countries too, the people who come to the United States, they want to maintain that aura of the home country, and so they're still living with the very 1960s 1970s patriarchal viewpoint. So my parents tried to fight it a little bit, which I'm grateful for, but in reality it was so sexist growing up. It was impossible to grow. There was a lot of boys will be boys. There was a lot of pressure on girls to succeed in certain ways while getting very little credit. As I grew older, I realized it was obviously beyond the immigrant community. Google does not hire female developers or coders. There is such a bro mentality. There is so much sexual harassment. I mean, we all saw that Stanford case where where he kind of was let out. That culture after sexually assaulting a woman, that culture is very, very predominant in the Bay Area. And there is definitely the sense that women of color cannot successfully start anything. And I have heard people, I've even heard close family members say things like, yeah, I'm not going to give money to somebody who is a woman of color because I know that even if I want to, other people won't. So I know she's going to fail, because the stock market's that thing where it's like convincing the next person what you have is valuable. And so they're like, I know nobody's going to take her seriously, so I'm not going to. It's not that I'm racist or sexist, but they will be. So I'm going to give the money to a white guy. And if you look at some of the biggest incubators, even if you look at the Y Combinator or other things, you will notice that there are very, very few women of color at all. And there's an even more disproportionately few number of Black people, because that's something I'm very passionate about, because it's just the colorism and the racism and anti-Blackness in the Silicon Valley is crazy. So yeah, I don't even think there's one thing that sticks out to me, because I cannot tell you how many conferences I've been to where people have asked for bikini pics or have harassed me or have said that is a contingency of VC funding. I cannot tell you how many conferences that I've been to where that's happened, how many pitches I've been to where that's happened, how many times I've had to send in a white man on my behalf to pitch concepts or ideas. So it is as bad as people say it is, for sure.
Oh my gosh, for those who are actually listening but not watching, like my jaw dropped when you're like, okay, like you have to send bikini pics for what? Right? Like how does that in any way, shape, or form actually demonstrate like the skill and the value that I bring? It just floors me. And I think you kind of alluded to one of the solutions that you had to kind of play around with is to send a white man to kind of pitch on your behalf. But like for those who are looking to kind of diversify into this Silicon Valley area and break into that bro culture, oh, maybe what's a learning lesson that you've had where you're like, hey, like this really helped me on actually trying to navigate the system of it all, right?
Yeah. So my top tip genuinely is to not assign the morality of the world you're in to yourself. So there's a lot of sometimes women, they will say, will be your worst enemies. And that can be true because they will have a narrative that if you have slept your way to success or if you are playing into this culture that you are a part of the problem. And I personally have always fought against it because I, again, am in a position of privilege where I feel that I can. But I would never judge someone who goes to these meetings knowing very well that you have to like act a certain way and flirt a certain way to get those numbers and those contacts. I would never blame the woman. And I think that is where we have to start because the more women we have in these positions, regardless of how they got there, the better it is for everyone. And sadly, there are just too few women right now. So the women who are there feel like they have to quote unquote act like men to succeed or keep other women out. There's still that very traditional culture. I've also worked a lot in DC, in the DC market, and I think it's better there because there are so many women in high places. And so while you would think DC would be more traditional and more conservative in many ways, in fact, it is easier to succeed as a woman there because although there is a lot of sexism, a lot of harassment on Capitol Hill, there are also a lot of women in high places. So it's not, they have carved out a path for other younger women and they do fight for more equality. So in the Silicon Valley, we're not close to that yet. And I think that the first step is rewarding, recognizing, and amplifying and congratulating any woman who is getting ahead in this and to not blame yourself for maybe not acting perfectly in these situations because you will find solutions. You will find like when you go to meetings, there are certain things that you can wear, dress, say that will get people to take you more seriously. And then if you're double thinking yourself all the time, am I doing the morally right thing? Should I stand up and say something, but then I'm going to lose this opportunity? Don't do that. Like, you're not going to be perfect. Obviously, you should stand up if you see injustice happen, but if you miss something, like, give yourself the grace to recognize it's a really difficult situation.
Great call out from that DC piece. And you know how sometimes when you're going to these networking events or conferences and you're like, oh my gosh, no one looks like me, like no one can relate and all that other stuff. And therefore it's more difficult for them to help me sometimes is what it feels like. So did you find that you had to create your own communities in order to really have the support that you needed? Or did you end up finding a group where you're like, hey, like this is my tribe. They don't have to look like me, but this is my tribe, right?
No, it's such a good question. So I would definitely say the people at YuVoice today are my tribe, and they are inherently so many different countries around the world, and they are based out of everywhere. And I think the fact that we are like one or two people in every different city kind of shows you sometimes how rare it can be in today's world to find people who are so passionate about making the world a better place and putting the world above their own interests and their own needs. And our dream is that everybody does that in the future. That's why we're creating this platform to motivate everybody to do that. So in the future, everybody feels like they have the ability to and the desire to and the expectation to change the world. So that's definitely my tribe. More locationally specifically, I found something very interesting has happened, which is that I simply have disparate communities. So I have like a group of nerdy white guys I hang out with because I want to play board games and I'm really into like board gaming and video games and stuff. And then like I have a group of like women of color I hang out with because if I want to complain about my experiences being a woman of color, there is no way those people are going to understand. And you kind of have these, disparate circles. I will say, and I'm curious about your experiences as well, but for me as an immigrant in the United States, while I have friends who are in India, I found it very hard to make friends with other Indian women in the United States. And so I don't have like an all Indian circle, but I do know many of them exist. And I don't know why I've never quite fit into those. And so that's something I'm still, I guess, figuring out, but I do have very, very diverse friend circles. I just don't have that, like my specific ethnicity or background, but I don't think that's a bad thing because obviously I love my friends from all different backgrounds. And I don't mind like sharing. I think it's wonderful to share your culture with someone, they share theirs with you, etc.
Yeah. You know what? I totally hear you about sometimes the difficulties that comes with creating those stronger bonds with people who look like you and come from the similar cultural background. I think there's a level of competitiveness is what I've noticed versus like from diverse backgrounds. It's like you all bring something different to the table where you're just like, oh, like that's kind of interesting about you that I've never had to experience, right? Therefore, I think there's a little bit more inclusion from that perspective, but not to make it like a blanketed statement, because there's going to be supportive people no matter what culture, community you go to, and then those who just don't care to see you succeed, right?
Yeah.
And one thing that you really touched on that I kind of want to dive deeper into is like you have a team of 100+ individuals from over 25 countries at YuVoice. So what does leadership look like as a Gen Z leader for such a dispersed team?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I'm definitely learning so much as I go along the way. I think if there is one thing people take away, it is surround yourself with people who are better leaders than you, who are smarter than you, who do things you do not know how to do. My goal is always to find someone to bring on the team who does something I know I cannot do. And I learn from them, but I also do not expect to learn as much as they do and take their job. So I think there's like this idea that when you bring people on your team, you want to learn from them so that you can even improve on who you are. But I think the thing you should actually do is to have the humility to recognize that you are never going to be as good as other people are at their superpowers, because you have your own superpowers. And so it's better to focus on what you are good at and contribute that to the team, and then find other people who can do the things you cannot and honor them with the space and the ability to flourish at what it is that they are good at. So like our chief product officer, Meru, she is incredible. The way in which she leads her team and inspires her team into action and has created other leaders on her team is incredible. And it is a leadership style that I don't necessarily have or use. And it works so well on her team and on her product team. We have incredible people on our marketing team that lead very, very differently. I joke with our new CXO, actually, Rochelle, all the time that like there's some people at the org who listen to her and they won't listen to me. They listen to her. But I know that she's like got that rapport with them and she's figured out how to work with them. And I learn from that, but I also recognize, hey, if I need that, I have Rochelle, I have Meru. It's so awesome that they're there and they can do that. So I definitely think collaboration and recognizing the value that everyone brings to the table is something that can take time, because in the current capitalistic society, we are so fundamentally taught that there can only be one leader, there can only be one big boss in charge. And even if there's a team, your goal should always be to outshine other people. That is not, you have to be the crown jewel, the crown diamond. That is terrible leadership. That is terrible leadership, but it is how the vast majority of people lead. They're always worried about how do I be the crown jewel? And you can make everything so much better and shine so much brighter if you're more focused on how do I help other people shine? Because they have, they are shining in a way that I cannot shine. And so helping them shine is going to make this so much better. And so that is what I really encourage people to do, is find people who are smarter than you, better than you, and get out of their way.
What a great call. And I feel like I can do a mic drop for you right there, because when you think about how much pressure there is on a CEO and an executive leader, or any leader in general, right? Because your goal is ultimately to be able to inspire people to do great work and achieve the business objectives. The more that you try to take on in an unnecessary way, the faster you're just going to burn out. And the more that you're just going to get in your people's way, right? Versus the way that you've approached it is like, help me help you help me, right? Like that's like fundamentally speaking, like that's smart, right? From a business sense, because you're not gonna have more hours in them to be able to do more work. So why not be able to distribute it in a way where it allows people to leverage their superpower? And I'm curious from your perspective, because I fundamentally believe in that you as a company can create a win-win situation as an employer for the employee and vice versa, right? So that you can get the best out of them and they can get the best experience and kind of share your brand. So with your leadership style, like how have you kind of gotten comfortable with that concept that it's like, hey, like the more that I invest into my people from that perspective and I let them leverage your superpower, the better it's actually going to help my company?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think this is where us being a nonprofit really impacts the way in which we do our work. And I think the same is true of like B Corps, employee-owned corporations. So there are corporations that approximate this, but basically having the primary shareholder of your data and your product be the people who are working on it and not some third-party shareholders. So not publicly owned traded corporations, etc. And the reason for that is because I genuinely think of this organization as everybody who's worked on it. Even the people who are no longer here, even the people who are not the face of the organization, it still very much was and is their baby. Something they have put their heart and soul into creating, their ideas into, right? We're all creating this together. And so that entity is the nonprofit, not me. If I left, that's still there. That's the nonprofit. It's not me, right? And that's just actually why I'm really passionate that I'm not the only face of the organization. I'm always trying to uplift other people, shout other people out, get other people on talk shows, because I think that it is so important to recognize, especially because of the purpose of what we're doing is to uplift voices everywhere. And it's not like my pet project because I want to be rich and famous. And I think it's so important that you start something where you're so passionate about the purpose, you would be okay with it succeeding, even if you weren't a part of it. And so it's just such an honor to be a part of it. I would rather be like supporting YuVoice in any way at all whatsoever than create or be like the rich famous founder of something else that isn't aligned with my purpose. And that gives me a lot of credit and stuff like that. So I genuinely think for me, again, it's one of the privileges that I have because I recognize that it is hard to think like this if you have been so trained in the hustle culture, capitalism mentality. Many of us have been raised in. So for me, I recognize it as a privilege that I just don't work like that mentally. I have never gotten jealous of anyone in my life. In fact, I used to go to a therapy session where I was like, I want to like see what that feels like because I was worried I had like a limited range of human emotions. But I think of it as a privilege because you can't control those feelings, right? You can't control feelings of possessiveness or jealousy or feeling like you're inferior to someone else, right? Like it's a privilege to be secure enough to do that. And it's something I've really worked on, but that has also come relatively easily to me. And so I always encourage people to work on that because again, just the grace to recognize that other people are better than you. And that doesn't take something and that doesn't take away from your skills, right? The fact that we have people who are better at people and culture or who have an HR background that I don't or legal background that I don't or anything, right? That doesn't take away from who I am as a person. But if you're raised in a society that so fundamentally tells you your worth is based on your economic productivity, it can be really hard to break that. So that is definitely how I see it. And so that informs every decision that I make as a leader.
Speaking of just really shaping your approach to the way that you do work and lead, I'm curious, like, how did you develop your leadership style? Because there's a lot of traditional models and how we grew up in corporate where leadership should look a certain way. And again, I use air quotations, right? But then it's as you go down your own path and you live those lived experiences, you're like, actually, I can pick and pull from different models. But at the end, like, this doesn't actually make sense for me. So how did you get comfortable with that instead of just succumbing to the pressure of what leadership should look like, especially in a bro culture?
Yeah, it's a good question. I play a lot of board games. Like, that's genuinely my answer. I think playing board games is the best way to become a better leader. There's like an actionable takeaway tip, but play board games. So depending on what you're trying to improve in your skill set, you want to play board games that allow you to practice it in a setting where it doesn't need to define your entire personality. But if you have to only play one type, I definitely say like if you play D&D or you play like Baldur's Gate 3 or any video game or board game where you are character developing and over time you are gaining skill sets, you start to recognize that real life is much the same way. So I don't take feedback as a very like personal criticism because I'm like, I'm a character sheet. I'm developing certain skill sets. I'm leveling up over time. And feedback helps me improve those things. And it doesn't feel very personal in some sense. And so I'm always looking at how to improve. And I'm always looking at how to build my party, meaning I need other people who can do things I can't. And anybody who's played a really good D&D or D&D based game knows that you cannot have no support characters. You can't have no healing. You can't be like, everybody wants to be a tank in front with a sword. So you sort of get really, really good at recognizing what you need and at genuinely like subconsciously starting to understand the value of every member in a team, how statistics works, right? Because human beings are really bad at having an intuitive understanding of what a 50% chance is or a 25% chance. Board games get you really good at that. Also really helps you become a better winner and a better loser if you play competitive board games. Gets you a lot better at understanding how people think and how people deceive if you play games like Secret Hitler or Mafia. Complex resource-based board games, in my opinion, are one of the best ways to learn about time management because the day is finite and you have to balance your resources. So I will literally think of it like I need to take a break today so I can recharge. This is my short rest. This is my long rest. I need my spell slots back. That has really, really helped me become a more effective leader and to more intuitively understand the resources that I have available and to safeguard myself as a resource as well.
That is so cool. I've never heard anyone share like their experience like playing board games and how that translates into real worlds of business life, etc. Because like for me, I think how I relate to that is with my practice in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, right? Like learning how to deal with stuff under pressure, problem solving under pressure, how to be an informal leader, but then also be a really great team player, like all those different things that you talk about. I'm just like, now what board game am I going to pick up, right? And as we slowly wrap up our conversation, I would like, one of the questions that I had for you is, what has been one of the biggest myths, whether it's in career or business, that you realize you're just like, man, that's bullshit, right? Like, and then how have you kind of like navigated that?
Yeah, growing up. Growing up is a myth. Like being an adult is a myth. You don't have to be. And I think this is something Gen Z is really good at, but we still shy away sometimes from truly being ourselves because there is still so much inbuilt generations of you need to act professionally, you need to act formally, you can't share your hopes and dreams and desires with people. I am definitely one of those tell my friends I love them people. I'm very, very here in every moment. I fought really hard for that. I had a lot of really serious mental health struggles before, and I realized, you live once, YOLO, all that good stuff. But I think a part of mindfulness is just genuinely that whole be a kid aspect. I never lost that, and it's part of why I felt everything so intensely. And I've been taught so many times not to do that, but so far, if anything, it's actually helped my career, not hindered it. And I'm not saying that will help everyone because we live in a society that is very professional and very Western professional, which has so many boundaries. We're such an individualistic society in the West. But I definitely think there's so much joy in being alive, and people forget that. People forget you can just sit down next to someone and be like, do you want to be friends? And like people feel like, yes. And you can just ask people because you're like struggling. You're like, hey, I'm struggling. I need to vent. Can I vent to you? Can you tell me how to move forward? And they'll listen, they'll help you. And everything doesn't need to be so complicated. So if you have issues with someone at work, sometimes you can just like tell them, hey, I'm feeling like this. This is how I feel. What's going on in your head? And it doesn't have to be like a fight. And I feel like so much of being an adult suffers from miscommunication and from bottling up your emotions and your desires and your happiness and your challenges because you're taught to grow up. And clearly I play board games. And my mom always said eventually I'd grow up and I wouldn't be into like, I'd learn how to have a conversation with people and I wouldn't want to play games anymore, but that's what I do. I play board games. I like skip on the sidewalk. I like walk on those little things like, you pretend the floor is lava, and I give myself space to throw tantrums or to be emotional or to tell people how I feel. I'm not saying I throw tantrums at work, but you got to give yourself the space to be a kid. That doesn't mean hurt people, but if you're not hurting people, do what you want. Why do you have to be professional or act like an adult? So long story short, biggest myth is that growing up is a good thing and that you should not act like a kid at work.
I appreciate that vulnerability and that call out, because in the odd moments that I've truly experienced the joy of play, whether it's I bought a Lego set because I was like, man, like I know this is gonna be one of those most like unproductive things I'm gonna do in my like season or whatever, but the joy of just sitting there and then like putting together a little Lego or like building a puzzle piece with someone that you enjoy being around, not because you enjoyed that puzzle in itself, right? And those moments I think they're irreplaceable, right? And it creates like this space for creativity to flow. And I think people really underestimate that because once you grow up, it's all about, okay, what do I need to do to adult and pay for the bills kind of feeling, right? And again, I fully acknowledge the privilege that comes with being able to play and have fun, but finding ways to intertwine that into work and life, I think is just great. So one of my second last questions that I have for you is when it comes to unleashing potential, what's the first thing that comes to mind?
It's funny that you talk about this right after we talked about playing. For me, it's time off. There's nothing that unleashes your potential like time off, especially when you're young. And if you have the ability, the privilege to take time truly off after you have recovered, after a rot day, after cleaning up your house, after all the requirements we do in most of our time off. You will have this moment where you are bored with what you're doing, right? Because now you're recovered. You have the bandwidth, the energy to think about something, and you will find what it is you truly love and truly desire. So for me, I reached a point in my work and my health, I took time off, and then the pandemic hit. So I planned to travel, which isn't time off because travel is its own, it's very intense. It's time off, but it's not the time off I'm talking about. And I just had nothing to do for a month or 2 months. And that is how Dweebs Global, our first nonprofit, was born and went viral. Then from that, YuVoice came because I genuinely was like, what do I do with this time? And people were reaching out to me for help. And I was like, yeah, sure, I'm happy to help. I've always privileged. I want to help you. I want to mentor you. I'm happy to do whatever I can. Just tell me what to do. And so people told us basically to start Dweebs Global. It was very much like, this doesn't exist. Can you create a list somewhere? Can you just put it up? Can you help people in this way? And I think that's what happens with time off. The greatest like artists and creatives, they repeatedly say that's when they get their brainwaves in like dreams, showers, like when they have time actually off. And that's true. Even if you're not a creative leader, you will have ideas, you will have realizations when you give your brain time to rest. I always get 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night, sometimes frequently 10. Like I sleep how much I need. I take time off. I think time off is critical, and it is an absolute privilege, which is why I often tell people, if you are deciding between, if you have enough and you're deciding between more money and more time, always choose more time. One of those two things you're not going to get later.
I'm grateful that you had that space off, because I think when we are constantly hustling, the impact that it has on us long term, you don't realize it until one day it really all comes out, right? So the fact that something great was born out of that is like incredible. And my last question to you is, what's one thing that you're working on that you're super excited about?
Definitely YuVoice. So I know we've spoken about it a lot, but it is truly the brainchild of so many different people around the world who've come together to create something that they saw as a need and is a need in today's society. I think social media has come to the point where it is promoting a lot of the things we've spoken about can harm society. It is also promoting a lot of toxicity to the world, to the planet, to other people, to animals. And that is because it is a for-profit company where the way you make money is not the way you give consumers and users what they want. There's like two completely different shareholder interests there. And that's why there's a lot of controversy, hatred, enclaves, bad algorithms, squashing of multicultural voices or diverse voices, influencers like selling products. All that is because that's what makes money, but it's not what's good for users. And so we fundamentally believe that we need a nonprofit alternative that isn't motivated by selling your data, selling ads, all of that stuff. We're not a direct competitor for current content creator media, because I think most of social media has lost the promise of social media. It's mostly about how to become famous and how to sell products, which is incredible and I think very, very needed, but is very different from the essence of social and the essence of media. And so we're very much about bringing that back, connecting people to work on projects that do good in the world, incentivizing those micro and macro movements with an algorithm that rewards doing good, and with karma being karma, not just the snazziest line you can come up with online or the best story, but genuinely the good that you do in the world. And I think it's just something all of us saw a need for, and we all had little ideas and we put them together to create this masterpiece. And I'm so passionate about it. I certainly don't take unilateral credit for it. It's been an absolute honor to create it with the people we've created it with. Very, very excited.
Well, congratulations on launching such an incredible organization that, again, is worldwide. I'm excited to stay in touch with your journey as you navigate this with your team as well. And to everyone else that's tuned in to another episode, thank you so much for your time and attention. It means the world to me, and I can't wait to stay in touch with you on my next episode. Till then,
thank you so
stay
much
safe.
for having me.